Episode 1, The Birth of a Legend. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chrome and Gasoline. I'm your host Alex, and today we're firing up the stories of one of the most mythical muscle machines ever to hit American roads, the 1967 to 1970 Shelby Mustang. In this first episode, we're rolling back the clock to see how this legend was born, how it evolved, and why those few short years left such a big mark. To really understand the 1967 to 1970 cars, we have to start with the man whose name is on the fender, Carroll Shelby. Shelby was a Texas-born race car driver turned builder, famous for helping Ford beat Ferrari at Le Mans and for creating the Cobra. When Ford launched the Mustang in 1964, it was stylish and sporty, but not yet a true thoroughbred. Ford asked Shelby to change that, and the Shelby GT 350 and GT 500 were the result. Those early Shelbys were built in relatively small numbers at Shelby American, where the atmosphere felt more like a race shop than a corporate assembly line. Mechanics and fabricators were constantly experimenting, tweaking suspensions, trying new parts, and pushing the limits of what the Mustang could be. That hot rod, hands-on spirit shaped the personality of every Shelby Mustang that followed. By 1967, the Mustang itself had grown up. The body was larger, the styling more muscular, and there was room under the hood for serious power. This was the perfect canvas for Shelby to create a more refined, more powerful version of the earlier cars. The 1967 Shelby Mustang arrived as a kind of street-legal race car with manners, big engines, upgraded suspension, and a look that shouted performance from a block away. The story doesn't stop there. In 1968, the Shelby Mustang lineup continued to evolve. The GT 500 KR, king of the road, showed up with a brutal big block V8 and an attitude to match. Production numbers stayed relatively low, which already started to give these cars an air of exclusivity. These weren't just Mustangs, they were something more special, more focused. By 1969, Shelby's influence at Ford was changing. The cars took on an even more radical look, with long, sloping front ends, big scoops, and a unique rear treatment that set them apart from regular Mustangs. They were still fast, still desirable, but you could also sense that the muscle car era was nearing its peak. Insurance costs, emissions rules, and changing tastes were all gathering on the horizon. The 1970 Shelby Mustangs were really the last of the line. Many were actually leftover 1969 cars, given new numbers and sold as 1970 models. After that, the original Shelby Mustang program shut down. It had been a short run, just a handful of model years, but what a run it was. In that brief window, the Shelby Mustang carved out a reputation that would last for decades. Contemporary road tests raved about the sheer power and presence of these cars. Enthusiasts loved that they could buy something from a dealer that felt like it belonged on a racetrack. At the same time, there were stories of dealers struggling to move such expensive, high-performance machines when a regular Mustang cost much less. Little did they know how collectible these cars would become. Today, when collectors talk about real Shelbys, the 1967 to 1970 cars sit right at the center of the conversation. They represent the moment when muscle, style, and racing pedigree all collided in one package. In just a few years, the Shelby Mustang went from an idea on Carroll Shelby's drawing board to an American icon. In our next episode, we're going to pop the hood on these machines and talk about what made them so special, the design, the engineering, and the performance that set them apart. Thanks for riding along with me on Chrome and Gasoline. I'm Alex, and I'll see you in episode 2, where we get into the nuts and bolts and the roar of the 1967 to 1970 Shelby Mustang. Episode 2, Design and Performance. Hey everyone, Alex here, and welcome back to Chrome and Gasoline. In episode 1, we traced how the 1967 to 1970 Shelby Mustang came to life. Today, we're getting closer to the metal itself. We're going to walk around the car, slide into the driver's seat, and talk about what these Shelbys looked like, how they were built, and how they performed. When you put your foot down, picture a 1967 or 1968 Shelby Mustang rolling up to the curb. The first thing you notice is that it doesn't look like a regular Mustang with a few stickers. The front end is stretched and more aggressive, with a unique fiberglass nose, extra lights, and a hood that practically announces what's hiding underneath. Side scoops, rear scoops, stripes, and Shelby badging give it a purpose-built, almost racing homologation feel. By 1969 and 1970, the styling got even bolder, with a long, sloping front, big functional scoops, and a distinct rear end that made sure you knew this wasn't just any pony car. Open the door and the differences continue. While the basic layout is still Mustang, Shelby models often came with special touches, extra gauges to keep an eye on oil pressure and amps, wood grain trim, and unique steering wheels. It felt like a car designed for someone who actually cared about what the engine was doing, not just how the car looked in the driveway. Even small details, like the way the tachometer is placed or how the seats hold you in place, remind you that this is a driver's car first. Under the hood is where things get serious. Early Shelbys built their reputation on high-revving small-block V8 engines and then on brutal big-block power. The GT350 focused more on balanced performance, while the GT500 and later, the GT500KR leaned into sheer torque and straight-line punch. Big block V8s, upgraded intake and exhaust systems, and performance-tuned components meant that when you turned the key, you weren't just starting a car. You were waking up a very loud, very alive machine. Of course, power alone isn't the whole story. Shelby Mustangs typically featured suspension and brake upgrades over a standard Mustang. Stiffer springs, better shocks, and beefier components helped the car handle the extra speed. It was still a product of its time, more of a powerful grand touring bruiser than a delicate sports car. But compared with many of its muscle car rivals, the Shelby felt more composed, more engineered. Drivers of the day often talked about the confidence these cars inspired on a fast back road or a long highway run. The steering had weight and feedback, the body stayed relatively flat in corners, and the car felt secure at the kind of speeds that would get you into serious trouble today. It wasn't perfect. The tires and brakes of the era could only do so much. But for its time, the Shelby Mustang delivered a blend of speed and control that really stood out. So what was it like to drive one? Imagine sliding into the seat, twisting the key, and hearing that V8 bark to life. The idle is lumpy and impatient, like the car is annoyed you're not already on the gas. As you pull onto the road, the steering is weighty, the nose rises slightly under acceleration, and the exhaust note hardens into a deep roar. It's not subtle. Neighbors hear you coming home, and people turn their heads at gas stations. The car demands that you pay attention, and in return, it gives you that old-school mechanical connection that modern cars often hide. Period road tests talked about strong acceleration, serious passing power, and the feeling that the car always had more to give. They also mentioned that, if you weren't respectful with the throttle, the rear tires were more than happy to remind you who was in charge. This was a car that rewarded skill and confidence, and punished carelessness. By the end of the 1960s, the Shelby Mustang had established itself as more than just a dress-up package. It was a carefully tuned, visually striking performance machine that delivered on its promise. In our final episode, we'll step away from the spec sheets and dyno charts and talk about what the 1967 to 1970 Shelby Mustang has meant to car culture, collectors, and dreamers ever since. Thanks for riding shotgun with me on Chrome and Gasoline. I'm Alex, and I'll see you in episode 3, where we explore the cultural impact and lasting legacy of the Shelby Mustang. Episode 3, Cultural Impact and Legacy. Welcome back to Chrome and Gasoline. I'm your host, Alex, and in this final episode of our 1967 to 1970 Shelby Mustang series, we're stepping back from the garage and looking at the bigger picture. We've talked about how these cars were born and how they were built. Now it's time to talk about what they meant and still mean to car culture and to the people who fell in love with them. The late 1960s in America were loud, fast, and full of change, and the Shelby Mustang fit right into that mood. It wasn't just transportation. It was attitude on four wheels. The long hood, the scoops, the stripes, and that famous Cobra snake badge turned the car into a rolling statement about power and independence. Owning a Shelby Mustang said you wanted more than the ordinary, even in a world where V8s and muscle cars were everywhere. Over the years, the Shelby Mustang became a kind of shorthand for serious performance. When people pictured an ultimate Mustang, the Shelby versions were what came to mind. They showed up at drag strips, road courses, and car shows, and they inspired countless posters on bedroom walls. Even if someone never saw one in person, they knew the look, the aggressive stance, and the promise that this car was built to go fast. Hollywood and pop culture helped cement that image. High-performance Mustangs, including Shelby variants and Shelby-inspired cars, made appearances in films, TV shows, and later video games. Whenever a director wanted to signal, "This character is serious about cars," a hot Mustang was a pretty good way to do it. That visibility kept the Shelby legend alive even when the original production run was long over. Meanwhile, collectors quietly began to realize how special these machines were. Limited production, a direct connection to Carroll Shelby, and a key role in the golden age of American performance cars all combined to make the 1967 to 1970 Shelbys highly desirable. Over time, well-preserved and correctly restored examples became stars at auctions and concours events. For many enthusiasts, owning one is the ultimate Mustang dream. There's also a whole community built around these cars. Owners' clubs, online forums, and meetups bring together people from all over the world who share a common obsession. They trade restoration tips, track down rare parts, and tell stories about the first time they heard a Shelby fire up. For some, the car is a family heirloom, passed from one generation to the next, along with the memories attached to it. The legacy doesn't stop in the past, though. Ford and Shelby would reconnect years later, bringing the Shelby name back to modern Mustangs. Those newer cars owe a lot of their image to the 1960s originals. The idea is the same. Take a Mustang, turn up the power, sharpen the handling, and give it a look that makes it instantly recognizable. Every time a modern Shelby roars to life, it echoes what was started back in 1967. So why does the 1967 to 1970 Shelby Mustang still matter today? Maybe it's because it represents a moment when American performance cars were at their boldest. Maybe it's the story of Carroll Shelby himself, the racer-turned-builder, who left his imprint on everything, from Cobras to GT40s to Mustangs. Or maybe it's the simple, unshakable appeal of a big V8, a manual gearbox, and a car that makes your heart beat faster just by sitting in the driveway. Whatever the reason, the Shelby Mustang has moved from new car showrooms into the realm of legend. It's a piece of rolling history that still feels alive every time someone turns the key. That's going to wrap up this mini-series on the 1967 to 1970 Shelby Mustang here on Chrome and Gasoline. I'm Alex, your host, and I want to thank you for riding along through the history, the hardware, and the lasting impact of this incredible car. Until next time, keep your revs up, drive safe, and I'll catch you on the next episode.